differences. The numbers are much bigger, the risks are much greater, and secondly, nobody's going to bail out America.
Right.
We have to solve our own problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, I mean, I'd like to run through a couple different questions.
Yeah,
I kind of wrote them down here. So, you know, we understand that the Peterson Foundation, from your website, that our unfunded liabilities, like you talked about in here, for Medicare are around $32 trillion. And
The new numbers are about 38.
38.
Yeah, the ones that come out in the financial statements, Medicare Part A, B, and D, the total unfunded obligation about 38 trillion.
Wow. Well, a few years back, because of the irresponsible work of Billy Towson and other members in Congress, you correctly warned about the new Medicare prescription drug benefit that was passed by the Bush administration, and we believe that the failure of this legislation was that it did not allow the government to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies over drug prices. Even though, for example, the Veterans Administration gets to negotiate with Big Pharma over those prices. Has that been changed in Congress yet?
It hasn't and should be. I mean, there's no question that the federal government ought to be able to negotiate to try to get a good deal. It's a very controversial issue. But I think we also have to recognize that even if you do that, we're still going to have several $1 trillion worth of unfunded obligations. The other thing you have to do is you have to recognize that for Medicare prescription drugs, we're providing huge taxpayer subsidies to individuals who are well off. On average, the premium for Medicare prescription drugs that individuals pay only pays for 25% of the cost. Well, that might make sense if you're near poor. It doesn't make any sense at all if you're well off.
Right.
And so that's an example of how the government, it's one thing to provide opportunity for people to be able to purchase this if they want. It's one thing to be able to subsidize people who are less well off, but we shouldn't be subsidizing middle and upper income individuals for a voluntary program. It's not affordable, it's not sustainable.
That actually kind of leads into one of our next questions, which is going to be referring to entitlement reform. And this is part of Medicare. Do you feel that with what you just said, do you think it makes sense to do means testing with Medicare, where in the sense of if you make more money, you pay more for Medicare and get fewer benefits because you're also exposed to other benefits elsewhere?
Right.
Do you think that makes sense for America?
Means testing means different things to different people. In some cases, when you say means testing, it means that you don't get it at all, depending on your income. In my view, we ought to be doing the following. We ought to be making sure that we have universal coverage, no matter what your age is, for preventative, wellness, and catastrophic protection. And that we provide options and choices for people to get more insurance if they want with competition, but they're going to have to pay for it. It won't be taxpayer financed, if you will, all right? Now, obviously, the government's going to do more for the poor, if you will.
Sure.
So I think we have to first focus on that, and then government should only provide subsidies, for those that are less well off. I mean, when you're less well off, you ought to, then obviously you can justify a subsidy. But if you're middle or upper income, you shouldn't be subsidizing somebody for a voluntary program. Now, I want to make sure I answered your question, so you may want to have a follow-up.
Well, and it actually kind of falls into, it's the same thing for Social Security as well. Do you think that applies where you can do means testing for Social Security, where you do contribute more basically, and you get less in order to sustain?
Well, that's how it works now. Basically, what ends up happening is that people who make more money up to the Social Security cap, which is close to $110,000 a year, they pay taxes on all their income up to that 110, but the benefits are disproportionately benefit the less well off. So the people who are closer to the poverty level get a higher return on their contributions than people who are earning at the cap. I think we're going to have to do more of that. I think we're going to end up having to probably raise the taxable wage-based cap. In other words, how much of your wages or self-employment earnings are subject to the Social Security tax, not eliminate it like you did for Medicare, because Medicare, we eliminated it, but that's only a 2.9% combined tax. Social Security is 12.4%, and you have a lot of small businesses that get taxed as individuals, and so that could really hurt small businesses, if you will. But I think we are going to have to raise that, which will even make it more the way that you're talking about, where people who earn more will pay more, but the people who get the most benefits from the standpoint of replacement rate, given that and better return on investment, are people that are less well off, as it should be.
Right.
So we have room for about one or two more questions, so we'd love to hear any questions you have on this summit.
Okay, that's great. One of the biggest things that we're curious about is obviously the millennial generation. What is the biggest thing that you think, other than raising awareness? We tend to be a generation where we can get out and do things, but for the most part, a lot of us are kind of apathetic and don't really care to know much about what's going on. how do you think we affect change in the most positive manner and get people out? Obviously, we stepped out with the election and we felt inspired to go do things and vote this past election, but like you said, it was all proportionate because everybody did. How do we get the young people to get out and change?
Well, first, two of the biggest problems we have as a society are ignorance and apathy. They make a toxic mix. I think the first thing is that young people have to understand that this is your future. I mean, people are mortgaging your future, and therefore you should have a direct interest and you have a direct stake in the outcome, a disproportionate stake. I think young people first have to understand that, and then secondly, they have to use social networking and other types of technologies to be able to bring pressure on elected officials, Democrat, Republican, or Independent, it doesn't make any difference, to start addressing some of these large, known, and growing challenges, and to hold them accountable if they don't. Believe me, elected officials are a lot more influenced by what they hear, from people who can vote for them, than what they see in advertising or on television or whatever else. Young people have to use social networking and leverage other technologies to be heard.
David, for the winners here at the summit,
Last question.
how would you say, or how would you like to see these winners impact you and your peer group? You guys are obviously the age group that's leading this nation right now. What would be your advice to them as far as the best way to influence the decision-making level with your peer group?
Well, first, we're very anxious to see, what the ideas are, and not everybody can win, but there are going to be a lot of good ideas that won't end up being selected, if you will. So without knowing what the ideas are, obviously we can figure out, well, what might we be able to do to help these things become a reality, okay? But furthermore, I think, as I said, these are leaders from the millennial generation from all around the United States. They're not only going to come up with ideas about possible solutions to be able to address these challenges, but they're also going to come up with ideas as to how to engage and mobilize this generation. And I think we're here to see what they come up with and figure out how we can help make it a reality.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.